Something shifted this morning, and almost nobody is talking about it correctly. Something broke open this morning that has fundamentally altered the direction of the Iran nuclear crisis. And the frustrating part is that almost nobody in mainstream media is explaining what it actually means. Here is what we know. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi touched down in St. Petersburg for a direct, face-to-face meeting with Vladimir Putin. Hours later, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov stepped in front of cameras and made something crystal clear. Russia's proposal to take physical custody of Iran's enriched uranium remains fully active, not historical, not withdrawn. A live standing offer sitting on the table right now. And then Peskov added a sentence that every person following this conflict needs to sit with carefully. It has not been acted upon. 5 words. But those 5 words contain the entire architecture of a geopolitical standoff that most of the coverage is either missing or deliberately avoiding. So let me tell you what is actually happening beneath the surface. Because the surface version of this story, foreign minister visits Russia, diplomacy continues, completely obscures what is genuinely at stake. The one demand that has never changed. For months now, across every negotiation, every back-channel communication, every diplomatic signal transmitted between Washington and Tehran, the United States has maintained one absolute, non-negotiable core demand. Iran must remove its enriched uranium from its territory, not slow its production, not cap its stockpile, not agree to inspections, physically remove it, gone from Iranian soil. We are talking about approximately 450 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, material that, with the right additional processing, can reach weapons grade within a matter of weeks. Enough fissile material, according to expert assessments, to construct multiple nuclear devices. This is not one item on a long checklist of American demands. This is the demand. Every ceasefire framework, every round of indirect engagement, every political message sent through intermediaries ultimately returns to this single point. The uranium must leave Iran. Everything else is secondary. Now, into this situation, Russia arrives with a proposal that, examined purely on its technical and diplomatic merits, appears to resolve the problem completely. Moscow's offer is straightforward. Transfer the uranium to Russia. Rosatom, Russia's state nuclear corporation, will take physical custody. The material will be stored on Russian territory. It will be reprocessed under formal international supervision. The IAEA will have full monitoring access throughout the entire process. Iran retains its nuclear infrastructure. The dangerous stockpile departs the country. The international community can verify every step. No military strikes required, no further escalation. A clean, supervised, verifiable diplomatic solution to the single biggest obstacle blocking any agreement. And this proposal, the one that appears to check every box, was rejected. That rejection is the entire story. And understanding why it happened is the only way to understand what Araghchi is doing in St. Petersburg today. What Washington is saying, and what it is actually doing. Let me be direct about this, because the mainstream coverage is consistently failing to say it plainly. The Trump administration rejected Vladimir Putin's offer to take custody of Iran's enriched uranium. This is not analysis or interpretation. It was confirmed directly by a U.S. official speaking to Axios, who stated without ambiguity, the proposal has not been accepted. On the surface, Washington's public position sounds entirely reasonable. Officials keep repeating that they need to see Iran's uranium secured. That phrase sounds constructive. It sounds like Washington and Moscow want the same thing. But the phrase conceals the actual disagreement. The United States does not object to the goal of removing Iran's uranium. It objects to Russia being the one who removes it. The destination matters as much as the departure. Washington wants the uranium out of Iran, just not in Russian hands. That distinction, which sounds minor when stated quickly, is actually the entire geopolitical conflict compressed into a single sentence. Because the moment you understand that distinction, Araghchi's decision to board a plane to St. Petersburg stops being routine diplomacy and becomes something else entirely. Iran is communicating a very specific message without needing to state it explicitly. If America will not accept the Russian solution, Tehran will engage Russia directly regardless. The channel stays open whether Washington participates or not. This arrangement has already worked once. To properly evaluate Russia's proposal, you cannot look at it in isolation. You have to look at history. Under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear agreement that the Trump administration walked away from in 2018, Russia was already performing this exact custodial function. Iran transferred approximately 97% of its entire enriched uranium stockpile out of the country. The destination was Russia. Rosatom managed the material. It was stored, processed, and maintained under continuous international oversight. The IAEA verified compliance across 3 consecutive years of the agreement's operation. The system did not break down. There were no significant violations. There was no diversion of material. There was no breakdown in oversight or monitoring. The arrangement functioned precisely as designed for the duration that it was allowed to operate, until the United States withdrew from the agreement and the entire framework collapsed. So when Peskov stands before cameras today and says Russia is the only country with demonstrated positive practical experience managing Iran's enriched uranium, he is not making a promotional argument for Moscow's capabilities. He is referencing documented history that anyone can verify. This is not a theoretical concept being proposed for the first time. It is a proven system being offered for reactivation. Russia has the physical infrastructure already in place. It has the existing legal frameworks from the previous arrangement. It has the storage capacity. It has the established working relationship with the IAEA. Officials connected to Rosatom have publicly confirmed that the technical aspects of a new transfer are feasible under current conditions. The coordination mechanisms needed to safely move and verify the material exist, because they were built for exactly this purpose years ago. Technically, proven. Diplomatically, precedented. Historically, successful. Which makes the question of why it was rejected not just interesting, but genuinely essential to answering. The real reason behind the rejection. The honest answer has very little to do with uranium management logistics and a great deal to do with strategic competition. Washington's documented concern, based on reporting from multiple outlets, is that handing Russia custody of Iran's enriched uranium would significantly expand Moscow's position in the global nuclear energy market. Rosatom already holds a substantial share of the worldwide uranium enrichment industry and nuclear fuel supply chain. If Russia absorbs Iran's stockpile, processes it, and potentially reintroduces it into global fuel markets, that compounds Russian leverage across European, Asian, and Middle Eastern energy consumers simultaneously. For an American administration that has spent years working to reduce international dependence on Russian nuclear services, pushing alternative suppliers, supporting domestic enrichment capacity, pressuring allies to diversify away from Rosatom, granting Moscow this particular advantage feels like a significant strategic concession. That concern deserves to be taken seriously. It reflects a real geopolitical calculation rooted in genuine competition, not paranoia. But the calculation has a cost, and that cost is becoming more visible by the day. By blocking Russia as the custodian, Washington is effectively insisting that Iran dispose of its uranium through some alternative channel. The fundamental problem is that no credible alternative channel exists in practice. Iran transferring its uranium directly to the United States is not a realistic scenario. The level of hostility and institutional distrust between these governments makes it essentially impossible. Transferring to American allies like France or Japan is equally implausible from Tehran's perspective. Destroying the material inside Iran requires the kind of cooperative access and mutual confidence that the current relationship between Iran and the West simply does not support. What remains is a paradox with no clean resolution. The US needs the uranium removed. Russia has a functioning mechanism to remove it. Iran is prepared to discuss it. But the identity of the solution's provider, not the solution's outcome, is blocking the entire process. And that paradox is sitting in the room with Aragchi and Putin in St. Petersburg right now. Reading Aragchi's move correctly. Aragchi's flight to Russia is being described in most coverage as a diplomatic visit. That framing is technically accurate and strategically inadequate. This is not a visit. This is a statement of position delivered through physical presence. Iran has a precise understanding of the corner Washington has constructed for itself. Tehran knows the Russian mechanism was rejected. It knows there is no viable substitute waiting in the wings. And it knows, with certainty, that the uranium question cannot be resolved without Iran's active cooperation, which means Iran retains meaningful leverage in this situation, regardless of the economic and military pressure being applied. Rather than sitting passively and waiting for Washington to produce an alternative, Iran is actively engaging the one channel that remains fully functional. And when Aragchi speaks to Iranian state media describing this visit as a good opportunity for consultations that are especially important at this stage, that carefully chosen language is communicating something specific. At this stage signals that the timing is deliberate, that conditions have created a moment of particular consequence, that Iran is not simply maintaining a relationship, but actively using a juncture in the crisis to shift the balance of influence. When talks are stalled, when Washington is hesitating, when the uranium question sits unresolved, Russia's role in the overall situation does not diminish. It grows, because the offer is still active. The mechanism is still operational. And Iran arriving in person in St. Petersburg is ensuring that the infrastructure for a deal remains warm, ready, and demonstrably available for when Washington's position eventually shifts. Whether through reconsideration or through the mounting pressure of unresolved energy market disruption. China's strategic silence. Before Aragchi departed for Russia, he spoke directly with Wang Yi. That conversation happened before Aragchi consulted with most other regional counterparts. A sequencing that tells you something concrete about where China sits in Iran's hierarchy of strategic relationships. China received early, direct visibility into Iran's intentions before today's developments became public. And yet China has said absolutely nothing about any of it. No statement about the St. Petersburg meeting. No public reaction to the uranium custody proposal. No visible positioning in any direction. This silence is not absence. It is a deliberate posture, and understanding it is as important as understanding what Russia and Iran are saying openly. 3 days before Aragchi landed in St. Petersburg, on April 24th, China and Russia held joint discussions with the IAEA specifically focused on Iran's nuclear situation. That meeting, that timing, that 3-day gap before Aragchi's arrival is not coincidence. It reflects advanced coordination, alignment of positions, and preparation before action. What you are observing across these events is a structured, layered process. The April 24th IAEA meeting represents a coordination phase, getting positions aligned and frameworks agreed before moving. Today's St. Petersburg meeting represents an execution phase, working through the specific architecture of what comes next. And China is observing the entire sequence from a position of quiet but substantial strategic depth, having already secured long-term energy arrangements with Iran and possessing the economic leverage to shape outcomes without requiring a visible public role. China is shaping the environment from within without stepping into the visible frame, and that invisible presence is precisely what gives Iran the freedom to engage Moscow today, rather than scrambling to respond to Washington's demands on Washington's timeline. The corner Washington cannot see its way out of. The rejection of Russia's uranium proposal has created a structural problem for Washington that is more severe than it publicly appears. The only mechanism with a documented track record of successfully removing Iranian enriched uranium from Iranian territory has been dismissed. While American officials search for a workable alternative, that alternative does not currently exist in any practical, Iran-acceptable form. And the central reality of the situation remains completely unchanged. Iran's enriched uranium is inside Iran. It was there yesterday, it is there today, and it will be there tomorrow unless a functional removal pathway is identified and accepted. That means continued pressure, continued energy market instability, continued elevated oil prices reaching into the daily lives of consumers across every major economy, and a conflict that extends without a clear, credible resolution mechanism in sight. Donald Trump framed the uranium question as representing 99% of the deal. J.D. Vance used essentially identical language. If that framing is accurate, and it appears to be, then rejecting the only workable mechanism to resolve the uranium question means Washington has effectively obstructed 99% of its own path to an agreement. The scale of that self-imposed constraint is what Aragchi sitting in St. Petersburg today represents. What is being worked through behind closed doors. This meeting is not about whether Russia will accept custodial responsibility for Iran's uranium. That fundamental question has already been addressed, and the answer is yes. What is being refined in the conversations happening right now is the architecture, the specific timelines for transfer, the precise storage conditions, the detailed IAEA verification structure, the technical safeguards, and most critically, the binding constraints on what Russia can do with the material once it has physical possession. That last element is the heart of Washington's objection. The concern about Russia subsequently reselling processed material, using it to expand market leverage, or deploying it as a geopolitical instrument without broader international consent. If the proposal being developed in St. Petersburg today includes genuinely enforceable limitations, real constraints, not diplomatic language, on Russia's subsequent use of the material, then the core American objection is substantially addressed. From there, the process follows a predictable diplomatic path. Aragchi returns to Tehran carrying whatever framework has been developed. It moves through regional intermediaries toward Washington, and at that point, the decision facing the United States becomes impossible to defer indefinitely. Accept the mechanism, or reject it a second time. The first option unlocks the 99%. The diplomatic window opens in practical terms. The pathway to ending the conflict becomes concrete. The second option carries a different consequence. The conflict continues, and the diplomatic record that accumulates tells a story with increasing clarity. Iran indicated willingness. Russia provided a proven, available mechanism. The United States declined twice. That narrative, once it fully takes shape, influences alliance relationships, shapes how nations across the developing world position themselves in the US-China-Russia competition, and frames every subsequent negotiation from a starting point less favorable to Washington. The counter-argument addressed. Honestly, Russia is not offering this proposal from humanitarian instinct. Vladimir Putin is not concerned with regional stability as an end in itself. Moscow is making this offer because it serves Russian interests, concretely, measurably, and profitably. Taking custody of Iran's uranium expands Rosatom's position in the global nuclear fuel supply chain. It elevates Russia's indispensability as a regional power broker. It gives Moscow a role in any post-conflict Middle Eastern framework. These are real strategic gains that Washington is not wrong to notice. But the critical analytical question is not whether Russia benefits. It is whether the available alternative is superior to the outcome Russia's proposal would produce. Because the available alternative is the situation as it currently stands. A blockade with limited effectiveness. A ceasefire that functions more as a diplomatic label than an operational reality. Growing instability across critical maritime corridors. Oil prices elevated enough to exert measurable economic pressure on populations across the global economy. And Iran's uranium stockpile sitting completely unchanged, unresolved, and growing more central to the crisis with every passing week. Weighed against that alternative, the cost of conceding some additional nuclear market influence to Moscow begins to look considerably smaller than the cost of the status quo. That is the calculation that was made and rejected. And the consequences of that rejection are walking through a door in St. Petersburg today. The 20-year partnership nobody factors. In one dimension of this situation is consistently absent from Western coverage, and it may be the most important contextual factor of all. In January 2025, just weeks before this conflict reached its current intensity, Iran and Russia signed a 20-year comprehensive strategic partnership agreement. This was not a diplomatic ceremony for cameras. It was one of the most detailed, far-reaching bilateral frameworks either country has formalized in the contemporary era. It encompasses economic cooperation, military coordination, intelligence alignment, and deep political integration. It stops deliberately short of a formal mutual defense commitment. But the degree of structural integration it establishes between these two governments is substantial. When Aragchi arrives in St. Petersburg today, he is not arriving as a supplicant seeking outside assistance for a country in difficulty. He is arriving as the representative of a treaty partner coordinating strategy with an aligned power that has long-term, binding commitments to Iran's continued viability as a regional actor. That distinction transforms the entire interpretive frame for this meeting. This is not Russia offering to help as a neutral third party. This is Russia being consulted and briefed as a strategic partner engaged in joint positioning, where the conversation is not simply, can Russia assist, but how do both governments position themselves to maximize their respective outcomes from the current situation? Russia's financial stake in the current instability is concrete. During periods of peak tension around the Strait of Hormuz, with global oil supply disrupted and prices surging, Russian energy revenues have increased dramatically, reportedly by hundreds of millions of euros per day during the most intense disruption periods. Every day that the conflict extends without resolution, every day that prices remain elevated, Moscow's financial position strengthens. This structural reality does not make Russia's uranium proposal insincere. In geopolitics, a proposal can simultaneously serve genuine conflict resolution and advance the strategic interests of the proposing party. These objectives are not contradictory, but it does mean that evaluating Russia's role in this situation requires holding both dimensions clearly in view: the genuine conflict resolution potential and the structural financial benefit Moscow derives from the instability that makes the proposal necessary in the first place. The phone that has not rung. Trump said there is a phone, a line of communication, a direct pathway to resolution. That phone has not rung. Instead, Aragchi is sitting across a table from Putin in St. Petersburg, refining the details of a mechanism that already has proven precedent, that Russia is prepared to execute, that Iran is willing to engage, and that the IAEA is positioned to supervise from day one. The only variable that remains undetermined is whether Washington will eventually supply the one word the entire process is waiting for. Until that word arrives, or until a credible alternative finally materializes, the uranium remains where it has always been. The crisis continues on its current trajectory. The window that the ceasefire was supposed to open continues to narrow, and Russia, without firing a weapon and without making a public demand, continues to occupy the pivotal position in the most consequential negotiation of this conflict, simply by being the only party with a working solution and the willingness to implement it. Watch St. Petersburg carefully. Whatever emerges from those closed-door conversations today will determine whether the narrow diplomatic window that still exists remains open or closes before Washington decides to use it. I will be back the moment this develops.